Okay, guys, so today's lesson is on water. And as we probably know, water is essential for life to occur, at least as we know it. And one of the main reasons that water is essential is because it fills all of our cells, basically our internal environment, our body, and the bodies of all animals and living things. All the cells they're in an aqueous environment. They're filled with water. That's where all the chemical reactions take place. That's what transports all the materials and ions in our body. It's all in water, and without water, a lot of that stuff would not be possible. And it's also necessary for a lot of species reproduction. If we didn't have water, if water wasn't around, then reproduction, it would be impossible for reproduction to happen for most species, really. So, now what makes water so special? Why is water so special? And, well, a big reason that it's so special is because it's a polar molecule. And if we remember, oops, I like to use a little bit thicker pen. So here's what water looks like. There's our oxygen. Here's our two hydrogens. And they're bonded, right? We have H2O, and we've already discussed that these are covalent bonds, so they're sharing electrons. Oxygen wants to have 8 in its outer shell, it has 6. Hydrogen wants to have 2 in its outer shell, and they each have 1. So oxygen borrows 1 from hydrogen, hydrogen borrows 1 from oxygen, they're both happy. And then because they're sharing the electrons, hydrogen, both the hydrogens end up having 2 in their outer shell, and oxygen ends up having 8. But we also said that oxygen is the greedy one in this sharing of electrons. The electrons spend more time around oxygen than they do around the hydrogens, and we know that electrons are negatively charged. So if they're more often around the oxygen, we're going to have a slight negative charge around the oxygen and a slight positive charge around the hydrogen, because their electrons are spending more time around the oxygen, and then it's just the positive proton in the nucleus left, and the electrons are around oxygen, so it has a slight positive charge. And so because water is this polar molecule, when a bunch of water molecules get together, they form what's called hydrogen bonds. And a hydrogen bond are when the negatively charged oxygen atoms are attracted to the positively charged hydrogen atoms, and they form a bond. It's called a hydrogen bond. So if you can imagine, we have a bunch of water floating around. Let's say we have another water molecule right here with its oxygen and hydrogen, and there we go. And so we have a slight negative charge here on the oxygen, our slight positive charges on the hydrogens. The negative and positive charges attract, and they form what's called a hydrogen bond. I'll abbreviate it here as an H bond, hydrogen bond. And so we get a bunch of those together, and then like you could have another oxygen right here. There's another water molecule there, and there'll be a bond here, and then maybe we have a water molecule up here. And then so these are bonded, and so we get a whole bunch of water molecules together, and they bond through hydrogen bonds. Now, something important to remember, the strength of bonds, covalent bonds are the strongest, generally speaking. They're stronger than ionic. Did I spell that wrong? I sure did, didn't I? Where's my eraser? Ionic are next, and then we have hydrogen bonds. So covalent are the strongest, then we have ionic bonds, and out of those three, for the most part, generally speaking, hydrogen bonds will be the weakest. So because of all this hydrogen bonding, water can do some unique things, and one of the things that water can do, and that we notice when we jump into it, is that it has a pretty high surface tension, and that's because of what we call cohesion. And if we look over here, the difference between cohesion and adhesion, and I talked about this in the class connect room, but if you remember, cohesion is the attraction between the same kinds of molecules or substances. Adhesion is attraction between different molecules or substances. So when we have something like this with a bunch of water molecules bonding and being attracted to each other, we'd have cohesion. And then if we had something, an example of adhesion might be if you have, attempt to draw, if you have a spider web. There's the spider web. And then if you see, like in the morning, you go outside and you see little droplets of water attached to a spider web. There's my drawing, there's my droplets of water. They're attached to the spider web. The water is bonded to the compounds in the spider web. That would be adhesion, right? Because we have water and a different compound bonding together. And so, because of cohesion, like I said, we get surface tension. And surface tension is just the bonding of water molecules together, and they're bonded really close to the ones around them and underneath them, and obviously not above them. And so it takes a certain amount of pressure to get through those bonds on the top layer, and that's why you see things like water bugs can kind of scoot around. It looks like they're walking on water, essentially, because of the surface tension of water. And then one other thing I want to mention is the role of cohesion and adhesion in plants, because there's a specific slide dedicated to that in your lesson. And so if we have a tree, let's say, how does the water get from the roots of the tree all the way up to the leaves where it's really needed? The tree needs a lot of water in its leaves, and the water will evaporate from the leaves. And so the water sticks together because of cohesion, and then it sticks to the sides of the vessels in the tree that carry the water because of adhesion. So if this is a vessel in the tree, let's say, the water molecules are attached to each other, and they're also attached to the side of that tree. So when water leaves from the leaves, so we have water leaving from the leaves, the water molecules right behind it will move into its place, and those ones on top, because of cohesion, are attached to all these other water molecules down there. It pulls them up, and then they can attach to the side of the vessel so they don't slide back down. And then more evaporates, so more water leaves. It opens a space right there at the leaf, and so the water molecules right next to that, where the one just disappeared, move into its place, and they pull all the rest of them up, and that's where the water enters in through the roots. And so it's sucked up through the roots, goes all the way up the plant, and then out through the leaves. Another particularly awesome property about water is its role as a universal solvent, meaning that basically it can dissolve almost any polar substance. It's the solvent in almost everything. Like we said, it's necessary. It's a solvent in almost all the chemical reactions that occur in living things. And so if we remember a solvent versus the solute, water is almost always the solvent. And the solvent, remember, is the material that does the dissolving. The solute is what gets dissolved. So if we have an example here, we'd have H2O, water is the solvent. And we'd have like NaCl, which is table salt, would be the solute. The water does the dissolving, the salt, the solute, is the thing that gets dissolved. And so we said before that inside cells is an aqueous environment. Everything takes place in water, and because of that, living things need a way to regulate the amount of water that they have in their body and in turn in their cells, right? If you have too little water, then the cells are going to shrivel up. There's not going to be any water in there, and you'll die. There won't be any place for the chemical reactions to occur. And if you have too much, then the cells can burst and they die also. So we have to regulate the amount of water, and that's really important. And we can think of lots of examples. Different animals do it different ways. We can think of like people and a lot of other animals that we think of urinate to get rid of excess water, and we urinate less when we're dehydrated, right? Because we want to hold on to that water. We sweat. We lose a lot of water through sweating. And then some animals, like it talks about the kangaroo rat can go months without drinking water because it keeps all its water nice. It doesn't, urinate a lot, and it makes sure it conserves a lot of its water. And there's water, and why it's so awesome in biology.